Grüß, willkommen in einem aufregendes video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 29 of my Star Trek TOS timeline series of videos. In this video, I will be discussing what we know about the Klingons. The final alien race that I'll be covering in any great detail is the Klingons. As with the Romulans, I have very little information, or useful information, in the TOS scripts. For example, I don't even have the name of the Klingon home world. As is my normal practice, let's look at the references in the TOS scripts and attempt to create a coherent view of this rather epic people. In the Savage Curtain, we learn the Klingon founding father was Kahless the Unforgettable, which set the pattern of Klingon tyrannies. As Kahless is wearing a modern Klingon uniform, he is probably not from the dim past and from the recent past. As the Klingons were a stand-in for the Soviets, Kahless is probably closer to a Lenin, Stalin or Mao character who set the pattern of their own respective totalitarian civilizations and unified their people and started expanding out. Good analogy would be if Trotsky was leader of the USSR and managed to conquer the world as he actually wanted to. The Klingons needed to have expanded into space about the same time as the Romulans and Terrans to allow them to be equal to those nations. As a result, linking Kahless to Lenin's rise in power in 1920 could work. This gives Kahless 80 years to unify his world, and then his successor would then sally out to create the Klingon Empire, retaining the tyrannical form of government Kahless created. In Friday's Child, we learn the Klingon Empire is made up of conquered worlds. This does imply the Klingons do not have a colonization program, nor do they have allied planets in their area of control. In Errand of Mercy, we learn the Klingons conquer planets, which seem to be the main method they are expanding. This confirms a lack of colonization or treaty-based allied system. Also in Errand of Mercy, we discover that when occupied by the Klingons, life is not much fun, possibly similar to the Soviet occupation of Hungary. In the episode of Private Little War, we discover the Klingons have the concept of a governor, which I assume is of conquered planets. Perhaps a conquered planet gets a governor of some description. While the home planet of the Klingon nation is mentioned in Errand of Mercy, it's actually never named. In A Trouble with Tribbles, Kirk mentions the Klingons are efficient, even if brutal and aggressive. Mara in The Day of the Dove indicates the Klingons are hunters and aggressive because they have poor planets. Possibly their home planet is poor. In Trouble with Tribble, we learn the Klingon Empire has something called a Klingon High Command. In A Private Little War, Kirk indicates scientific missions is not the Klingon way. I expect they research military technology, but it could mean they steal technology from their conquered planets, or it's stolen from non-conquered planets, or it could simply be a bias that Kirk holds against the Klingons. In the Tholian Web, we learn the Klingons have a nerve gas called therogen, which must mean they do research weapons, if nothing else. In The Trouble with Tribbles, we discover the language spoken by the Klingons is Klingonese. Well, I suppose that's reasonably logical. In A Day of the Dove, we learn a Klingon spacecraft. I assume this is a capital ship, has a crew of 400. In A Trouble with Tribbles, we learn the biology of a Klingon is different from a human, which is not unexpected, but it's good that it's confirmed. They're the facts that we have available in the TOS scripts. Now let's try and make sense of it. We can say the following things. The Klingons are hunters and aggressive, possibly due to Darwinian pressures caused by their home world being poor, or perhaps caused by biology. The Klingons conquer worlds, enslave the inhabitants, and appoint governors to these planets. This implies minimal, if any, colonization. The Klingon Empire has a home world, so the Empire may be dominated by a single world, although the name of this world is never mentioned. The Klingon High Command may be the central military or even political organisation in the Klingon Empire. Kahless the Unforgettable set the pattern of Klingon tyranny, so some ideology-based origin of the Klingon Empire must exist, similar probably to the communists. This does imply an empire which is top-down, totally dominated by the Klingons, and is caste-based, with the Klingons on the top. This is not a nice empire. While the Klingons are a stand-in for the Soviet Union, there is some clear differences. I can't see the Klingons believing in the rising of workers throughout the galaxy and joining the Klingon workers' paradise. While the USSR was dominated by the Russian people, and most other races were actually considered as second class, it was still possible to rise to the top, even if you were not ethnically Russian, as Stalin proved, although in order to do it, you had to do it over the bodies of many people. This seemed unlikely to ever be possible in the Klingon Empire. Perhaps the Mongols are a better analogy, with Soviet paranoia thrown in for good measure. As we have discovered, even the military governor is always monitored, which does sound a bit totalitarian, Marxist, Leninist type nation. The conquest path is probably the most efficient one, as a colonisation program will only provide tangible military and economic benefits in 100 if not 200 years, while having a significant cost during the period of colonisation. That would have also been the Romulan strategy, although the Romulans, I'm sure, also used alliances because they're a stand-in for the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire did actually start with allies before they conquered it. And this could have been also the Earth strategy if the Vulcans were not around monitoring the Terrans. Although without the Vulcans, Earth would have most likely been conquered by the Romulans, so that is a moot point. I don't think Earth would have ever been given the opportunity of following the Romulan or Klingon path. They would have probably ended up being a subject nation of the mighty Romulan Star Empire. A conquest path would have required a large garrison, but as the main logistic issue is food, that would have been provided locally, so this would have been simple to implement once you had conquered the planet. One space station in space with some kinetic weapons would have been which would have made revolt very difficult, if not impossible, and while issues may arise until the old generation of your new subject planet had died off, the USSR and even China have proven you can conquer a different race and suppress them long enough to completely make them a compliant subject people. The various wars the Klingons were involved in have been covered in other videos, so I'll only briefly go over the references of these we have here. In Errant of Mercy, we discover the Federation and Klingon Empire are at war in 2264. The Klingons have sent a fleet to a strategic planet. I suspect the number of spacecraft, which are capital ships, is around about 8, although this is an educated guess. This is mentioned in Errant of Mercy. Also in Errant of Mercy, Kirk talks about the Klingons invading Federation territory and killing Federation citizens. This must be an earlier war. 23 years prior, which may be 2242, the Federation and Klingons fought a battle which was inconclusive. The battle seemed to be over a planet, Sherman's planet, or perhaps a planet called Donatu 5. I assume this was not a major conflict, as the planet was presumably uninhabited, that is Sherman's planet. This is the first reference of a Klingon Federation conflict we have. There is a possibility the Klingons invaded Federation territory, as Kirk claims in Errant of Mercy. Klingons have invaded and killed Federation citizens, which is what Kirk has mentioned. It's unlikely he was talking about the short-lived war in 2264, as the main fighting was occurring in neutral territory, so this must have occurred earlier. The conflict in 2242 did not seem to involve inhabited planets. Perhaps this was the start of a Klingon incursion into Federation space. In the episode Whom God Destroys, we first discover there was a Federation victory at Axanar against an unknown enemy, with Captain Garth commanding the Federation forces. Assuming Garth was 30, which is young but possible, and he is now 50, this may have occurred in 2246 or more likely in 2245. There was a minor war between the Klingons and Federation in 2242, which may have lasted until 2245, so I have to assume this was part of the same conflict. I covered the Federation Earth War in far more detail in an earlier video if people are interested. And so we come to the end of another short video, in this case part 29 of my Star Trek TOS timeline, in this case discussing the Klingons. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.